May the 8th, 1945, VE Day, victory in Europe. After years of struggle, a deserved celebration. But how did the Allies do it? How did they defeat Adolf Hitler's massive, powerful army? What was the turning point? The answer to this question is the landing in Normandy, the most important battle the Allies and Germans ever fought. Historians tell us that there would be no victory in Europe if Normandy was a failure. But it wasn't. It was successful. And they called it D-Day. In 1942, the Allied military leaders talked about opening up a new front in Western Europe. They wanted to help out the Russians, who were in an enormous battle with the Nazis. Finally, in December 1943, at the Cairo Conference, General Dwight D. Eisenhower received command of Operation Overlord. This would become the largest amphibious invasion the world had ever known. He immediately instructed the gathering of large quantities of supplies for the Allied invading fleet. These were to be stored in southern England. Meanwhile, Hitler prepared for the invasion. The only thing Hitler didn't know was when it was coming and where it was going to take place. In England, General Eisenhower and his deputies charted the liberation of a lost continent. They planned when and where the mighty armies of the United Nations would strike. Today, Normandy in northern France would be that battleground. Operation Overlord would be D-Day. Into the building of their defense system, the so-called West Wall, the Nazis used their slave labor of conquered nations. Pictures made by the Germans themselves to impress their satellites with the strength and invincibility of their fortifications. Within steel and concrete emplacements, 4 years in the making, the Germans have amassed every known weapon of defense. Naval batteries and heavy artillery were housed in almost impregnable concrete bunkers. These guns could reach out to sea and engage heavily armed warships. Whether those weapons were enough to stop the Allied onslaught would only be proven in the future. Because Hitler didn't know exactly where the Allies would strike, he had to place heavy armies all along the coast in sometimes very quiet areas. On the beaches themselves were set up barbed wire fences, minefields, and anti-tank ditches and ramps. Behind the Atlantic Wall were 4 armored divisions of Panzer Group West. On the other side of the Channel, England, an armed camp bristling with armed tanks and trucks and guns from the United States and Canada. Here is the fruition of 4 years of planning and production. This is a glimpse of England as the Allied armies awaited D-Day. Locomotives built to run on continental railways. Freight cars and tank cars that will replace rolling stock that was destroyed by the Germans. All this and more is included in the gigantic preparation for the invasion. D-Day. Also gathered is the enormous Navy Armada, assembled to transport the Allied armies across the English Channel. Here is something of the ingenuity of the Allied engineers. Assault boats and invasion barges launched directly from the decks of the ships that brought them to England. Week after week, the fleet grew in numbers. Steel ships of every description. Ships that were especially designed and constructed for the mission upon which they were soon to embark.
Johnny, get your gun, get your gun, get your gun. Take it on the run, on the run, on the run. Hear them calling you and me, every son of liberty. Hurry right away.
Nothing was left to chance. Every loading operation was rehearsed and timed in advance. Every soldier knew his station. Every man knew where he was to fit into this gigantic pattern. Daily, they boarded their ships. For all they knew, they were bound for France or Belgium or wherever their commanders have decided to strike. Every jeep, every tank, every piece of mobile equipment was assigned its place in the grand strategy of attack. In May of 1944, the air attacks were stepped up. Low-level bombing was carried out that included railroads, enemy headquarters, radar and communication systems, bridges and ammunition and supply dumps. The Allies also stepped up their battle with the Nazis in Italy to deceive Hitler. At the end of May, hardly a bridge remained intact in France. In England, the rehearsal was complete and the men were all briefed. The Allies were prepared for battle. The landing was planned for June 5th. The tides would be right on that day for the landing. Equipment and supplies were loaded. Then the men, 50 divisions, were in England, and 8 were picked to begin the landing. On June 3rd, the Armada was ready, but on the 4th, the weather report was unfavorable. A heavy storm was brewing, which would make the landing hazardous and the air support impossible. The heaving seas would make the Navy gunfire erratic. Eisenhower agreed to a 24-hour postponement. Any longer than that would mean that they would have to wait until the 20th for the tide to be favorable again. As the storm pounded through the channel, the forecasters predicted a break in the morning of the 6th. So on the 5th day of June, 1944, a fleet of more than 4,000 ships put out from England. This was D-Day. Paratroopers landed in Normandy behind the coastal defenses. Landings made with timing and precision, perfected through scores of rehearsals.